So welcome everyone to the April 2025 edition of UMEIT Zoom. Glad you all are here. And today we have Dr. David Field with us to talk, and I get to introduce him, which you've heard me introduce him so many times. I'm trying to think of what can I say? I don't know. Dr. David Field, as you know, was raised in South Africa and now lives in Switzerland. He taught for a while at Africa University in Zimbabwe. He also led the E Academy in Europe, which is the lay. Well, no, it's not just the lay. It's the training academy for Methodists in Europe. And now he is ecumenical staff officer for Faith and Order and Theology, which means that David is responsible for the bilateral dialogues, the bilateral commissions, and then the theological work of the Council of Bishops. So he staffs the Faith and Order Committee and the Faith and Order Commission, because there are two. And he also helps the bishops answer questions when they need a little theological research done or opinions. I also want to say that his two books, Bid Our Jarring Conflicts Cease and Our Purpose is Love, are both really good. And I think Our Purpose and Love can still speak to us today, even after disaffiliation, as we try to figure out who we are as United Methodists. So that's me talking way too much. David is here to talk with us about Faith and Order today. And David, we're obviously glad you're here.
Good, great. Thanks, James. Always good to be here. I don't need much introduction anymore. Most people know who I am. I need to share my screen. Let's see. I think, does that do it? All right, now. I always hate it when I'm sharing my screen because I can't see what you can see. There's a kid's game in Germany that says, I can see what you can't see. But you can see what I can't see, so it's a little bit confusing. All right, let me see if I can put this better. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the Faith and Order Committee. As Jean mentioned, there are two bodies. There's a leadership team on Faith and Order in the Council of Bishops, which is made up of bishops reflecting on around issues of faith and order. It hasn't done very much in the past. Most of the actual work of Faith and Order is the Faith and Order Committee, which is established under the Book of Discipline. I'll read you the paragraph in a few minutes. And our focus is really to provide theological reflection for the church and its mission in the world. So, if we, this is the definition or the description of the task given to the Faith and Order Committee from the Book of Discipline. That the Committee on Faith and Order shall give leadership to the United Methodist Church in reflecting upon, discerning, and living out matters of faith, doctrinal teaching, order, and discipline in the midst of the mission and ministry in the church and the world. The committee shall be a visible expression of the commitment of the United Methodist Church to carry on informed theological reflection for the present time in dynamic continuity with the historic Christian faith and our common heritage as Christians grounded in the apostolic witness and our distinctive Wesleyan heritage. That's quite a mouthful of a definition with a huge amount of information. Essentially, we're to provide the kind of theological leadership for the church. You want the paragraph number? I'll get it for you. I can. Well, once I've stopped sharing, I can get it for you. Jean's looking it up at the moment. So, sorry, I should have put that down. To provide theological leadership for the church to reflect on our mission, we also have an important ecumenical function. It's not quite clear from this task, but it is a very important ecumenical function. You who know the history of the ecumenical movement will know that one of the major streams emerging out of the Edinburgh Conference in 1910 on mission was the so-called Faith and Order movement. Coming out of Edinburgh, there was this recognition that one of the key obstacles to greater cooperation were issues of faith, theology, and issues of order, the church polity, the way we organize our church, and the theological justification we give to that. This became a separate movement, eventually established an office in Geneva, and then with the founding of the World Council of Churches, became part of the World Council of Churches. And through the decades since then, has provided theological leadership, seeking to look for ways of, or how can I say, discover our theological agreement, even when we've kind of obscured this with different language and different ways of thinking, and has produced numerous documents. Perhaps two of the most important ones was the first is the Baptism, Eucharist and Ministry document, which is really foundational for the way we've thought about those three aspects of the life of the church, which have been key dividing points. How we understand baptism, how do we understand Eucharist, and how do we understand ministry, particularly things around the episcopacy and that kind of thing. So it was a very important consensus document. More recently, there's been a document on the church, and now the title just goes out of my mind. This comes when you don't write things down. The Church Towards a Common Vision, which came out in the beginning of the 21st century. And that's also been a key document in beginning to think of, who are we? What do we understand by this concept church? What is church? And has begun to explore that. And there's a whole process. There was a consensus document, and then churches were asked to reflect and respond to that. And that has been an ongoing process. And you can actually download most of those documents, both from the World Council of Churches web page. And they've also got the volumes of the various responses of the church on that, and they're available just to download free of charge. Just to say, if you want the other documents, there's also a link on the WCC webpage. The Internet Archives have all the papers from Faith and Order movement archived there. So that I can also put in the chat just now. Okay, but we have our own Faith and Order Committee, and that is reflecting on our understanding of ourselves, but is also very key in how we relate to other denominations. So like there was the ecumenical document, Baptism, Eucharist, and Ministry, we've had documents on baptism, by water and the Spirit. We had the document on the Eucharist, this holy mystery. And as we'll come to now, we're busy working on 3 other documents relating to the church and ministry. And so that's where we are. So those become important documents as we engage in dialogue. So for example, a number of years ago, when we were beginning the dialogue with the Episcopal Church, they said, well, what do you people believe about the Eucharist? And we could give them the document and says, this is what we stand. And they then wrote a response, and that becomes the basis of discussion and dialogue. It's not just what you think we believe. It's not just the question of whether we use grape juice or wine, but there's a whole theological understanding there that underlies who we are. And so those are very important documents for our theological dialogues. So what is this? This committee is made up of people from across the connection. The present committee is chaired by Bishop David Bard. And then there are a number of bishops, Bishop Sally Dick, Bishop Rosemary Venner, Bishop Daniel Lunge. Always one of the ecumenical staff officer. Well, now we have 2. One of the ecumenical ecumenical officers is part of that. And then Matthew Lafferty, who some of you know well, who is also from the US but works in Rome at the ecumenical office in Rome. Henk Pieterse is originally from Namibia but teaches presently at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary, so he'll be retiring soon. Doug Strong, Ted Campbell, Lizette Tapia Raquel from Philippines, Amanda Sayers, Mahariza Matumbara, Hilda Marie Mavafag, Philippi Maya, also interesting, originally from Brazil, but now based in Boston. Maureen Lankerok, Mark Gorman, and Stephen Sowers. And then my responsibility is to staff that. It's an interesting group. It's from across the US connection internationally. Perhaps there's still a bias towards the US, but that's the way the present way it's structured. We've got people who are involved in active pastoral work, people who are teaching at various seminaries. There are lay people, there are ordained people, there are bishops. It's a very exciting group to work with, with very different opinions and ideas, but it really is an encouraging group. We've had one major meeting this year, beginning in January, where we really, the first time we got together as a group, and that's chosen for this quadrennium. So what are we going to do? In this year, this quadrennium 2024 to 2028, we've been given tasks by the General Conference. The Faith and Order Committee can make up their own tasks if they want to. They can also, the Council of Bishops can give them tasks to do depending on what other issues are around. There was a question about how often we meet. We meet once a year physically, and then as numerous times during the year online. So also we divided into subcommittees working at different projects, so the whole group doesn't always meet together. And also that the Faith and Order Committee can co-opt other people to help with particular projects. So where there is a project, a need for a particular expertise, we can ask somebody else to come in and be part of the discussions, produce material for us. And so we can expand beyond the membership, which is very helpful, particularly when you're dealing with issues where perhaps you need expertise from outside or expertise from other contexts and other situations from what we've got. We only meet once a year physically. That's primarily because of cost. It's a large group to bring together for a meeting. So that's well, I'll come back to a little bit. What are our tasks for this quadrennium? The first is to revise the document Sent in Love, which is the document on the church, which was produced by the Faith and Order meeting to be submitted to the 2020 General Conference, which was then postponed and finally met in 2024. And a number of concerns were raised by the Legislative Committee dealing with this. 2 or 3 issues. One was the church is in a very different place in 2024 from what it was in 2016 or 2020 when most of the original work was done. And so what does that need to help us to think through where we are? Post disaffiliation, post all that, what went on, and where how do we understand ourselves in relation to those issues? Another concern was raised was that the language was not very understandable and needed to be retooled a bit to make it more useful. And this is a difficult task for the Faith and Order Committee, because the question is, whose audience are you writing for? Both this Holy Mystery and By Water and the Spirit were eventually put out by the Board of Discipleship. Discipleship Ministries then produced a study guide and a text to go with it, so it could be used in lay leadership, in lay training, in congregations. So that's one aim. We need to be helping our church, both ordained pastors and lay leaders and just lay people in the church, to understand what does it mean to be a United Methodist. What do we understand about baptism and the Eucharist and the church? So that's an important task. But on the other hand, these documents are also used in our ecumenical dialogues, where you've got critical theologians kind of poring over them and saying, well, we don't like that bit. And how does that bit fit with, the understanding in this denomination with whom we're talking to? And so it's a difficult task to get the language right, which is understandable and clear, but doesn't sacrifice on theological depth. So we're working on that. Another big issue, which does also relate to where we are, wasn't actually directly given to us by General Conference, but in our discussions, we've really identified that. And that is, if we begin to think of regionalization, what is the understanding of the church that underlies our process of regionalization? Is this just a pragmatic step to deal with complexities of having an international church? Or is there real theological undergirding for what we're doing? How do we understand connectionalism? We talk about the church being a connectional church. What is the theological undergirding for that? Particularly when we begin to think across cultures and continents and languages. So what does to use Hank Peters's phrase, an intercultural contextualism, an intercultural connectionalism look like? How do we connect with each other when we have very different contexts and cultures? How do we understand the faith? What do we have in common? How do we differ? Where do we connect these things together? And how does it affect the way we think about the church? So it's a big piece of work we've got to do. We've also been asked to produce a document on a UMC theology of ecumenical relationships. That kind of fits in with the Sent in Love, and probably in the end, in my opinion, should be a section in Sent in Love, a new section on ecumenical relationships, because that really is just how do we think about other churches. This is one of the things that Jean and I regularly get, or fairly regularly get, is a question from a superintendent or an episcopal, somebody, an annual conference saying, somebody from this church has applied to be, would like to become an elder in our conference. What do we need to do? Do we recognize this church? How do we go about transforming? That's the theological issue. What is our theology of relation to other churches? What is required in terms of exchange of ministers? How do we think about other churches generally? Historically, Protestants said we were not Catholics, and the Catholics aren't really Christians, and so we don't accept what they do. There've been the whole debate we've had with the Episcopal Church around apostolic succession, because for them to be acceptable, we need to fit in with the apostolic succession. We don't have that in our kind of understanding of the church. So what kind of fits in with that? Or what form of baptism is acceptable? We had a question a while ago about a person who was seeking ordination in the UMC and had been baptized in a oneness Pentecostal church. And is that baptism acceptable? Do we need to rebaptize them? Or do you need to reaffirm the baptism in some way? So there's all sorts of questions there, and we have to think, and at the moment we don't have any statement around that. We don't have any General Conference opinion. So, in the end, as Jean says, that lands on my desk, and I have to write something and try and pull everything together and say, this is what I think, in the light of our documentation, in the light of our theology, is the way forward. In this case, it wasn't too much of a problem because the person had already said that they would like to be rebaptized, but there were still some questions with how this all would. When is a rebaptism, and when is it a baptism? So those are the kinds of things that we need to think about. How do we go about dealing with that? Or what about other Methodist churches? Do we just accept all other Methodist churches? No. So there's in one sense, some simple issues, but also some complicated issues there. The third task given to us was to re-examine our sacramentals understanding post-COVID. Now, the code behind that, this is, of course, code, which actually means what do you do about online communion, which is the actual question, not the one that was actually the way it's posed to us. So that's a question of how do we think about the sacraments, and how does that relate to online or virtual services, virtual sacraments? And although sacraments, it usually mostly means communion. I don't think online baptism has yet been raised as an issue, though I know I have heard of people who do online baptisms. So that is one of the things that involves not just theological reflection, but also there's a survey, a questionnaire. Some of you will probably be receiving one sometime, as to what is being done, how it's been practiced in different conferences and different parts of the connection. You'll know that during COVID, different bishops made different decisions as to what could and couldn't be done. And so in different conferences in different parts of the world, different things were done. So we need to think about that and come again with that as a kind of supplement to what we've got in this Holy Mystery. This obviously also raises ecumenical issues, because some of our ecumenical partners are very strong about the way the sacraments are administered, and the notion of an online sacrament is deeply dubious. Others of our ecumenical partners have been engaged in online communion and sacraments. The Methodist Church in Great Britain, for example, has been discussing for quite a while the whole concept of an online congregation, a purely online congregation. Virtual, what does that mean? For a whole lot of things, for the sacraments, but also a whole lot of other things. The Methodist Church in the Caribbean and the Americas, one of our Concordat partners, has online communion as a fixed practice within their church. And they produced a study in one hand. So our different ecumenical partners have different views. How do we come to an understanding, and what is the theological grounding for that? Not just a pragmatic statement. The fourth task was to develop an official United Methodist catechism. This we've kind of put on ice for the moment, and are looking at how does this relate to the already. We produced a document a while ago called Faith Working Through Love. It's not an official document of the church. It's a document recommended by the Council of Bishops. And the request was for an official document which sets forth the teaching of the United Methodist Church. This raises a number of complicated issues, and so we put it on ice for the moment, and we will come back to that and when we thought about how we can best deal with it, and how that relates to the document which we already have. The third big piece is working with the Standing Committee on Central Conference Affairs around the General Book of Discipline. You will know there's been a long process that's been going on for a number of years, trying to discern, to take out from the Book of Discipline what should apply across the connection and what should apply regionally. Originally, that was phrased as what could central conferences adapt and what could central conferences not adapt. Now, assuming, and we don't know where we are with regionalization, assuming regionalization passes, this task switches slightly and becomes the question, what would be the Book of Discipline for the entire United Methodist Church? And what are parts that can be adapted and changed or not used at all? And so there's a process of going paragraph by paragraph through the Book of Discipline, trying to see what is central and what is really core to our identity and what can be adapted, or what can be just is not relevant to many people, or how can we reduce it so it might have a statement. I mean, we have long statements dealing with various things which are purely US centric and relate to US law. So how do we change that? And then the final piece, we were supposed to be working with a committee for the Study of Ministry Commission. They produced a document, a draft document called A Sacred Trust, a theological framework for ordained ministry in the UMC. Also a document produced for the 2020 conference. Nothing work done on it till we came to, and was sent back for further work. And we will be working with them to ensure that our understanding of ministry, our understanding of the church, our understanding of the sacraments all link together and fit as a whole. According to my clock, I have 1 minute left, so I will stop there. And if there's any quick questions or things that we can do. Oh, there's lots of stuff in the chat, I see. Okay, it's mostly the document. What did I want to put? I wanted to put something in the chat and I can't think of what it was. Come back to me. Was it on one of the documents?
Thank you.
But anyway, if any questions, any people want to ask anything,
So, Dr. Phil, we in the Arkansas conference during COVID, we dealt with the online communion, and our bishop at the time made a ruling that as long as it was live and not recorded, then it was, in other words, if you prompt your people to know that this is going to take place, for them to have the elements in place and to participate, and it being live, that's one thing. But if that happens, you could not record and save it for a later date. So in other words, you had to do away with that, either that portion of the recording of worship, or you not record the whole worship service at all. Yeah. And our current bishop has not made a different ruling from that. And so I share that to ask the question: is that in line with your understanding and what you're going to be putting on pen to paper about in the future?
I don't know what's going to be in the paper about it at this stage, because we're still busy doing it, and there's a subcommittee working on that. I mean, there was a ruling pre-COVID. It wasn't a Faith and Order Committee. It was a subcommittee of Council of Bishops, which did a study group, of which I was a part of. This was before I was employed by the Council of Bishops or anything, in which they asked for a moratorium on online communion. And essentially what happened when COVID came is individual bishops then just made their own decisions without reference. Well, some said, we have a moratorium, we're not going to do it. Others just said, this is an emergency. It wasn't envisaged in this moratorium. Methodists tend to be flexible. We tend to do things and then think afterwards. So let's just do it, and we can find some theological rationale once we've done it. And so that's why we've got this kind of patchwork of different rulings across the connection. Obviously, the question is, that was COVID. We're now post-COVID. We're in a different situation. How does that reflect? Do we just say what was an emergency ruling now becomes the norm? Or do we revert back to the old one? So, and I mean, the question of time is an issue. If it's simultaneous, there's kind of complex metaphysical questions about time and space, how God works through time and space. How is grace communicated? What does it mean to be in community with each other? David, is it different when a youth group goes off for a camp somewhere and there's no ordained person with them, but they'll gather together as a group? Can they link in by internet to a pastor, or can the elements be consecrated before them and they take them with them? All sorts of interesting questions, but time is up.
So many questions. One of the lines that struck me from the Book of Discipline was this informed theological reflection for the present time in dynamic continuity with the historic Christian faith. That is an interesting phrase, and you have carried us through that phrase and some of the challenges of it in our time together. So thank you very much for your presentation, for this conversation. I also know that David is available via email if you have other questions for him. His email is in the chat as well, and I'm sure that he will come back and share with us again in the future. Thank you for being with us. I'm going to invite us to close in prayer. Let us pray. Holy and creative God, as we journey with you in this work toward unity, may our eyes not look away, but be wide open to the world. Help us to see where divisions can cease and where divides can be closed. Keep our hearts and minds open to the other, that we may find blessing in our diversity, even as we find connection in you, the source of our grounding. Move us ever closer to living out the prayer that you have prayed for us, that we may all be one. We pray this in the power and the love that we know as Christ. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Blessings as
you.
you go forth today, and I look forward to seeing you soon in the future.
Next month, Chris will be live from Florida with the Episcopalians. So come back.
You see.
Bye, everybody.
With the Episcopalians.
Bye.
Take care.